Hi, this is Johnny. We're coming with our last Bible study for this book. Next week we'll begin a new book. We'll begin the one that follows this, Building Your House. We'll begin Protecting Your House from Pests. And we'll talk about how to keep all the bad attitudes and even the little demons out of our house that want to invade our house. This book, if you didn't get a copy, you can go to Amazon and they may have a few copies. It's out of print now. And soon I'll be reprinting it. It'll be going to the publisher soon, and it'll look like this, like a building. This will be similar to the cover. So if you haven't gotten your copy yet and you can't find this copy of Building Your House on Amazon, well, just wait a little bit and you can get this one. Today we're going to talk about, I told you I'd tell you a story about the thing that, the wind that blew against my house the strongest, that came the closest to destroying my house. And that was years ago, and I mentioned it a time or two during our Bible studies. But years ago, our son, our oldest son, who was our second child, he decided that he would leave the principles that we had taught him as a child, and he turned to drugs and alcohol. And he broke my heart. And it happened over and over that he broke my heart. And for probably 40 years, we prayed for him, for God to deliver him. And at times, he came to church, he would confess his sins, and he would serve God for a while, it seemed, and then he would go back to drugs. It had a huge hold on him. And that it was like, at times I didn't know if I could live. The burden was so heavy on me, and I felt like somehow I had failed him in raising him. Even though I taught him scriptures, I read Bible stories to him when he was very young, and he memorized scriptures growing up, and he accepted the Lord at a young age. He finally married after several years, and had 3 beautiful children. He loved them dearly. He loved his family. But he's had such a hard time with the alcohol and with the crack cocaine. And there was times that he would serve God, and then for maybe several months at a time, and then he'd go back. One day my husband was walking next to the church where he was pastor, and it was embarrassing to know that our son was not following our guidelines or the lifestyle that we lived. And we didn't want people to know at first, and then finally we decided that almost everyone has a problem in their house. We've been talking about building your house and how to build a strong spiritual house. How that Jesus said if we build it on a rock, and that rock is the Word of God, and in the Word of God is Jesus' teachings in the Sermon on the Mount. And he said if you build according to that Sermon on the Mount and his teachings, love God with all of your heart and love your neighbor as yourself, and follow the teachings of Jesus, that it's like building on a rock, and your house will stand when the storms come. Well, when our storm came, it was really hard, and there were times that I felt like I could hardly live through the night. But we survived. And then this one day, Malcolm was walking on the sidewalk beside the church where he was pastor in Jacksonville, Florida. And he said he was praying for Mike, and it was as though the Lord spoke to him and said, Mike is as good as delivered. He's okay. Mike's going to be okay. He's as good as saved. And that gave us so much hope. When my husband told me that, it just like encouraged me so much that he would be all right. But it was still a battle. For years, it was still a battle. He lost everything he had. He lost his family. He lost his wife, his children. Was not around them like he wanted to be when they were growing up. Although they do have some good memories of him. And finally, he passed away early from the life that he had lived, I'm sure. He died when he was 54. But for the last 10 years, he served God, and that was so important to me. During this time, when Mike was serving God, Rod Parsley came to our camp meeting in Wimauma, Florida, the Church of God camp meeting, and spoke. And Mike had gotten a prayer cloth from Rod Parsley, and Mike carried it in his wallet. And that day that Rod Parsley preached at the camp meeting, Mike felt that God wanted him to go to the school for ministers to train for ministry in Ohio. And not long after that, God made a way for him to go. He even received a car. Somebody gave him a car that he drove up there. And he seemed to be doing very well for the 3 years he was there. And then something terrible happened that I won't tell you about today. I'll save that for next week. Now, Mike gave me permission to tell his story. He told me one day that if I would tell his story, maybe it would help somebody else. And that's why I'm talking about him today. But we were getting older, and it was almost time for my husband to retire from the ministry. He was a pastor for almost 50 years. And we didn't know where we would live when we retired, because as a minister and a pastor, we always lived in the church parsonage. Wherever my husband was pastor, we lived in the parsonage, and we didn't have a home of our own. And so I began to think about what would we do and where would we live, and I would drive around. Our next to the last church was out in the country, and we lived on a country road. And I'd drive through the countryside, and I'd see homes, and I'd see land, and I'd say, God, there's so many houses in this world, and in America there are so many, and even around our little country community there are many homes. Is it possible that I could have one? So we would have our own home when we retire. And there was a little house, a little cement block house that was right next to the church my husband pastored at the time. And things happened that we were able to buy that little house. And I was so excited to have my own house. The first time we had owned a house, it was a little 2-bedroom, 1 bath, and it was built in 1955, the year we were married, and I just felt like that was the house for me. And Mike surprised me. He remodeled that house. He made it, this is the house, this is part of the kitchen, this little breakfast nook. And he remodeled it. He took down walls. This used to be the utility room where I'm sitting now, but he took down the wall over there and added walls and pushed back a wall and closed in the carport and made an extra room. Later he closed in the front porch and made me an office, and closed in the back porch and made me a laundry room. And so he did a lot of work on this house, and during that time he loved God, and he would bring his radio over and he'd turn it on wide open, as we like to say in the South, and listen to gospel music while he worked. And I was so thankful for what God had done in his life, not only for me and what he was doing to help us about retirement, but for what it would mean for him. And during this time, I had sent this book to be published. I sent it to the publishers. And between the time it was that I sent it and the time it was published, something dreadful happened, and I'll tell you about that next week. And it is the beginning. It will begin this next book that we'll study from, about protecting your house from pests. So until then, God bless you, and I'll see you again next Tuesday on Turnaround Tuesday, and I'll tell you how God did another turnaround for Mike. He has done so many turnarounds in the lives of people we know, and I'm so thankful that we can bring our problems to Him, and it doesn't matter what they are. He will help us to turn them around, and He'll turn our lives around. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next Tuesday on Turnaround Tuesday. Bye.